Nobody believes that I was kidnapped by fairies on Christmas Eve. Aren't you a little old to still believe in fairies? It was always the same words, the same slightly upturned lips like they were trying not to smile. I always expected that response, but not so passively, like dragging a blunt knife down my spine. Nobody believed me. A year since I was kidnapped by fairies and left behind while my friends were taken away, and I was slowly losing my mind between giving into my own delusions and gaslighting myself into believing I'd had some kind of psychotic break and none of it was real. Dr. Casey was my latest in the long line of psychologists assigned to me since my so-called mental breakdown. Sitting in front of me, her smile was patient and her eyes were trying to be sincere. I liked her office. It was a lot cozier than the others. The one in Boston had walls that made me feel like I was in a psych ward. Sickly green, resembling barf, with two bright lights and a TV in the waiting room that only played ancient game shows with zero volume. Dr. Casey's office was minimalist with a desk and a bookshelf. The decor was warm, purplish blue, an outdated laptop sitting in front of her. Unlike my other therapists, she seemed human. While the others had clinical white offices and scary-looking posters on the wall bearing mental health disorders and human trafficking warnings, Dr. Casey had stained coffee mugs and ancient comic books piled on top of each other. A dog-eared copy of Percy Jackson sitting on top. She chewed on her pen between writing, tapping her feet to a beat only she could hear, which was familiar and relatable. My therapist was a beautiful woman, kind, brown-flecked eyes and velvet-colored hair tied into an untidy ponytail. When she leaned forward and met my gaze, I found myself taken aback by her natural beauty. She smelled of fresh pine and lemon and had a smile that wanted to help. Dr. Casey made me feel comfortable. I thought I could tell her everything. So I started talking. Hesitantly at first, but the more I was speaking and actually letting everything out, all of this fear and frustration and anger I had been bottling up for a whole year. Initially, she seemed interested when I told her the basics, nodding and making comments to assure me she was listening. I started telling my story as normally as possible. My flight was canceled on Christmas Eve, and because of my age I had no choice but to join my fellow young travelers inside the unaccompanied miners' lounge. Dr. Casey kept smiling and scribbling in her notebook until I got into the meat of my trauma, why I couldn't fully look her in the eye, and even a year later, I still struggled to sit still. My hands were always wandering, either delving into my lap or playing with stray thread on my jeans, my fingers steepling together, constantly clammy. I could never fully suck air into my lungs during a therapy session. I had an odd posture, leaned over myself, my lungs crushed. There was never enough air for me to breathe, and my body was constantly too light, like at any moment I would lose contact with the ground altogether. This kind of thing was better to explain by saying, I had a psychotic break, but I thought I could talk to someone who would listen. Who wouldn't call me crazy? I always felt small and childish, hating the words coming from my mouth. 18 years old, and I still felt so much younger. I was kidnapped, I told her, a lump growing in my throat. Dr. Casey's smile faded, eyes darkening. I noticed her fingers tighten around the pen. She began to write before pausing, her gaze snapping to me. Kidnapped? I could already see the cogs in her head turning, ready to make phone calls and offer support, maybe even call the police. It's not like I didn't look like a kidnapping victim. I was sickly pale from malnourishment, my hair hung in tangled streaks in front of my face, and I hadn't bathed in days. But my failure to meet basic hygiene was for a completely different reason. I didn't know how to tell her I couldn't wash or brush my hair, and I couldn't force food down my throat. They wouldn't let me. When I spoke of them, she leaned forward with wide, sympathetic eyes that were going to listen, urging me to take my time. She thought they were human, an abusive family member or significant other. That was until I dropped my gaze, shuffling uncomfortably on my chair. It had been the same leather chair for 3 weeks, and I still couldn't get comfortable. The upholstery felt wrong grazing the backs of my jeans, and I had been nervously picking on it since starting my session. I had been skating around the subject of my depressive episodes, because when I eventually let loose and went into detail, I always lost them. I lost my therapists with one single word. Kidnapped, I said again, by fairies. Dr. Casey stopped writing, her lip twitching slightly. She lifted her head. You were kidnapped by fairies, her brow shot into her hairline. Dr. Casey's expression crumpled into what might have been sympathy before confusion and amusement took over. Before I could respond, she cleared her throat a little too harshly and spoke the words my last 5 therapists had said with the exact tone. Miss Jameson, aren't you a little old to still believe in fairies? Yes, I was. I didn't even believe in them when I was a little kid, and now I was being hunted by them. In the space of a year, fairies, and to an extent, Santa Claus were real. Dr. Casey sighed when I didn't reply. Okay then, Ruby. She continued to scribble in her notebook, and I wondered if she was making a note to send me for an MRI. Her smile was still polite, though a little strained. Just like the others. Why don't you talk me through what happened? I started to, but she cut me off. Miss Jameson, there is nothing wrong with disguising your mental trauma with preferred fantasy. It's common with young people. Fantasy? Was she fucking serious? I knew the difference between reality and fantasy. For the last several months, both had blurred into each other, enveloping me completely. To other people, fantasy was what they saw on TV or read in books. The Fae folk, beings of light and beauty hiding amongst the flowers. Which was the fantasy I grew up with. That fantasy, however, had been haunting me since I escaped my fate to become an heir of the kingdom. It existed in the tricks that woke me up at night, open windows when I was sure I'd shut them, and poison ivy between my sheets, my possessions being whisked away. That was a warning. When I refused to submit, they bled inside my brain and made me question my own reality. I coughed up my own blood and teeth, lost clumps of my hair. They wouldn't let me shower, or brush my hair, or eat. They were constantly there, whispering and giggling in my ear, murmuring nursery rhymes in their language, their songs all entangled with my lost friends' names. These little bastards tugged on my hair when nobody was watching, a symphony of childish giggles entwined in my skull. It's not fantasy, I spoke coolly and calmly, but in the corner of my eye, I could see sharp flickers of movement. It's real, I whispered. I was taken to a different world where fairies exist. She nodded, continuing to write. Okay, and would you say you were awake during this venture? You said you were falling asleep in an airport terminal, correct? Dr. Casey nodded at me with a smile. Do you think maybe you experienced a vivid fever dream? No. I swatted at my own face again. I could hear giggles. They were laughing at me. No, I was definitely awake. I spoke through gritted teeth. I wasn't alone either. There was a group of kids with me, and there were these screens that... I caught hold of myself. I know it sounds crazy, but I struggled with my hands, stuffing them into my lap. These screens, the ones in the room they took us to, they hypnotized kids into thinking they didn't have parents. Dr. Casey lifted her gaze. So, are we talking like mind control? I nodded. Yes, there was this Christmas-themed animation playing, and it put my friend into a weird trance. I felt my own secondhand embarrassment, resisting the urge to rake my nails down my face. It made him think he was an orphan, just like everyone else. I saw it too, and I can't explain it. My hands were wandering again, this time streaking through filthy strands of my hair. I could feel them tugging my scalp. It was an endless tug-of-war with them. Still though, thinking back to their influence on me, that for a single moment with my eyes captured by their magic, my mind drowned by their light and lullabies, I thought I was an orphan myself. It was so vivid. I had been suffocated with false memories of an orphanage I never attended, wooden bunk beds and children that were not real. These things had planted fake thoughts, fake feelings and memories inside my brain, enchanting me and luring me in, before I had snapped out of it with the help of Levi and Talia. I didn't realize I was choking all of that out, words tangling from my lips, my voice splintering, until I was handed a tissue and I swiped at my eyes. I didn't mean to say any of that out loud, but saying their names, or at least revisiting the memories I had tried to suppress, was a surprising weight off my chest. Dr. Casey continued writing. She was scribbling way too much to just be making notes. Okay, and who is this friend? She looked up at me, lips quirked into a smile. She wasn't laughing at me. This was a sympathy smile. She thought I was fucking crazy. I tried to lean across the desk to see what she was writing, but she easily hid her notebook from my prying eyes. Was he a fairy person too? Jude Whitlock, I whispered. His name didn't feel real or right on my tongue, almost like he didn't exist anymore. No, he was a human, and they took him along with the others. I played with the thread on my jeans. He was the worst affected. I think because he already felt detached from his parents. So, it wasn't hard for them to wipe them from his memory. I straightened up in my seat. Jude didn't have a good relationship with his mom. Dr. Casey cocked a brow. Oh! Yeah, he said he only got to spend time with her 2 days a year. She paused writing, tapping her pen. And you haven't seen him since? I shook my head. No. The last time I saw him, he was completely under their control. Their fairy mind control? Dr. Casey cleared her throat. Something flickered in her expression. I saw her write separation followed by a question mark. And did you say the other kids? She flicked back through the pages of her notebook. Levi and Talia. Were they taken too? Nodding, I squeezed my eyes shut. Yes, but they were replaced by fake versions. I think they're called changelings, though there are also these things called strays. Who are human kids turned fae that the kingdom gives back? Uh-huh. She chewed on her pen. So, to go over, your human friends were kidnapped by fairies and replaced with. She nodded at her notebook, replicas of them that are called strays. I shook my head. No, the strays are different. They're not wanted and given back to the human world. They're previously kidnapped kids no longer wanted. She met my gaze. And have you met a stray? I did. When I was saved by the kind fae who brought me back, there were two strays in the car. I still remembered their battered and bruised faces, skeletal figures, and haunted eyes. I remembered the markings on the boy's head from his crown, his flesh shredded and burned, sliced and ripped apart. The slits in the girl's back, where a semblance of wings may have been before being cruelly sliced away. I never saw them again. There were hunters on Earth who specifically went for stray kids. I was told they were worth millions to humans. I admitted. But they ran away before I could talk to them. Of course. They ran away. I stuffed my fists in my lap, trying to breathe. You think I'm crazy. Dr. Casey dropped her pen with a sigh, her gaze flicking to me. Well, at least you're self-aware. Honestly, this all sounds a little far-fetched. I am not supposed to be harsh with my patients, but you are an exceptional case. She inclined her head. Ruby, how exactly did you get it into your head that you're being hunted by fairies? This world. She glanced at her notebook. All of these things. Your friends being kidnapped and, half-fairy kids spirited away, child eating plants, magical doorways, and stray kids being hunted down. It's not really real, is it? Here we go. Ruby, the world is boring. And I don't blame you for creating this world inside your head. Dr. Casey offered me another sympathetic smile. You are an intelligent young woman, and you don't seem to be suffering from either neurological trauma or PTSD. She tapped her manicure on the edge of her desk, rechecking over her notes. Do you think you may have an overactive imagination? These friends you talk about. I watched her fingers drum a single beat. Levi, Jude, and Talia. Are they perhaps people you strayed away from? Dr. Casey talked with her hands a lot. It's possible that you have created a fantasy of sorts to cope with losing their company. She leaned back, her smile a lot more patient and understanding than all of the others. But she still didn't believe me. I think those words were what broke me. Not telling me I was too old to believe in fairies, or implying I had psychosis. She was telling me friends I lost were not real, just illusions of my mind. And if they were real, they were past friendships I was dwelling on and clinging onto. Something splintered inside me. I can't breathe. I managed to grit out. I feel like I've lost half of my breath since coming back, and sometimes I can't suck in air. My voice broke. It feels like I'm suffocating. My therapist cocked her head. That sounds a lot like asthma, Ruby. She leaned forward. Do you think maybe you're suffering from panic attacks? They're not panic attacks. I surprised myself with a yell. They stole my breath. Who stole your breath? The fairies. I swallowed my words, clawing out my hair, pulling it from a particularly violent tugging match between two sets of tiny hands. I mean fae. I think they're referred to as fae. Yes, I believe that is what they're called. Her deadpan tone was starting to get under my skin. Can't you see them? I hissed out, holding out a strand of my hair. They're right here. Dr. Casey's mouth hung open, like she was struggling to coerce words. Before she could speak, though, her gaze snapped to behind me, her expression twisting. Liam, this is a private session. I twisted around in my chair, meeting eyes with a boy who was my age. Hiding behind a bed of dark blonde curls, his eyes were wide with terror, parted lips moving like he was trying to speak, but failing. His gaze was frenzied, almost feral. It only took a single glance where intricate lines of ink danced across his forehead, like a child had been using his face as a canvas, for me to know what he was. Doctor. Casey was blind to the state of him, and he knew I'd noticed it, quickly yanking the hood of his sweater over his head. Shut the door. I'm with a patient. I'll be with you in a moment. The boy shot me a look, like he was trying to speak, before nodding and stumbling back into the waiting room, quietly shutting the door behind him. Please excuse Liam. He's one of my patients. He doesn't know the meaning of privacy. My therapist turned back to me, her expression relaxing. Have you spoken to your parents about any of this? Do they offer their support? No. I didn't mean to raise my voice, but I felt like I was being ripped apart inside. Parents were a sore subject. Just because I escaped the kingdom didn't mean I wasn't replaced too. There was a girl with my face living with my mom and dad, a girl with too pale skin and the slightest point in her ears, a playfulness in eyes full of mischief. I watched her meet my father at the airport. Ever since then, my life had been on a downward spiral. I choked up blood-stained flowers daily. I lost my teeth. There were vines growing at the back of my throat, markings I couldn't explain on my legs and arms, like I had already been branded as theirs. Marked for the hunt. I'm not crazy, I whispered, trying to ignore my hair being yanked and pulled from side to side by tiny fingers. I've lost my parents to a thing that looks exactly like me, I hissed out. I've lost half of my breath. There is a constant choke hold around my neck, squeezing breath from my lungs. They're slowly killing me. When I jumped up, Dr. Casey flinched slightly, like I was going to attack her. I'm constantly light on my feet, I continued. I feel like I'm floating, like I'm never really touching the floor. Sinking back into my chair, I couldn't resist a sob. They send me warnings. Dr. Casey hummed. Warnings? Okay, and do you have them here with you? I thought back to the confused look on my Boston therapist's face when I tried to hand her an old piece of parchment I'd found glued to my window with the remnants of my roommate's cat. The parchment was an invite into the kingdom and to accept my crown as an adopted heir to the court. The calligraphy was always graceful, beautiful, scrawled in human blood. I dropped my gaze, losing all my bravado. It's invisible to adults. Risking a glance, I could see the muscles in my therapist's face twitching. Casey's lip curled. I was losing her. These warnings that are haunting you are invisible to adults? She cleared her throat. Okay, so your kidnapped friends have been replaced by fairy replicas, and you're being haunted by a fairy kingdom, but their warnings are completely invisible to adults. I thought back to Liam. And what they do to you, I added. The markings and brandings. It's all invisible to adults. I could tell Dr. Casey was losing her patience. Still, though, I was surprised she held out this long. The Boston therapist gave up at the start. Miss Jameson, you are 18 years old, which is classified as an adult. I jumped when she dropped her pen on her desk. Go home, Ruby. The woman nodded at me to stand up, and I did, grabbing my bag. I don't think we need to continue this conversation. Before I could protest, her phone rang, and she picked it up. Yes, my therapist lowered her voice, gesturing for me to shoo like I was a rabid raccoon. Uh-huh. Yes. Perfect condition. Yeah, I'm in the possession of. She trailed off, meeting my gaze. It. Dr. Casey cleared her throat, irritation pricking in her eyes. Ruby, I believe we are finished talking. Have a nice evening. She went back to her phone. Yes, I've got it with me. Yeah, like I'd said, 0 scratches or marks. When she collapsed into hissed whispers, I strode towards the door, only for something to catch my eye. On her bookshelf were tiny wooden fairies bearing wide smiles and intricate wings. These things looked cute and playful. They looked nothing like the beings that kidnapped my friends. I couldn't resist turning around, my gut twisting. Do you collect those things? Dr. Casey turned to me, her phone still glued to her ear. Sorry, what was that? I pointed to the figures. Those fairies. Do you collect them? Her gaze flitted to the figures, lips curving into a smile. You could say that she pointed to her phone. I'm actually in the middle of selling them right now, so if you wouldn't mind. Before I could answer, I was already being escorted out of her office, the door slamming in my face. In the waiting room, the boy from earlier was sitting cross-legged on a plastic chair. My heart leapt into my throat. I knew it wasn't him, but the way he was sitting, tense, dark eyes following me across the waiting room, like a caged animal, he reminded me of Jude, bearing the same scowl and eyes that did not trust easily. Jude was a private school kid I'd met in the airport, a boy who didn't want anything to do with me until our plane was canceled. When we were taken into the kids' lounge, I lost him, his mind already captured by the hypnotizing screens. Jude mentioned a lost sister, which made me wonder if there was more to him than I'd thought. The last thing I said to him was reminding him he had a mother and a sister. But he had been far too gone to hear me, enveloped in their fairy dust. Unlike Jude, who previously had a destination, his parents' house, this kid looked tragically lost. He purposely bowed his head to hide himself, but I already knew who and what he was. I could see exactly where his disgraced crown had sat on top of thick blonde curls. You're a stray, I said, folding my arms. Go away. He shied away from me, shuffling back like a wild animal. The boy pressed his head into his lap. They already know your name, he sniffled. His voice was rough. I could hear the turmoil and torture he had gone through. I wondered how long Liam had been inside the kingdom. From the way he was acting, he must have been young. You can't run from them. A shiver skittered down my spine. How did you escape? Liam looked up, his lips splitting into a grotesque smile of razor-sharp teeth. I was replaced. I nodded slowly, swatting at a tiny ball of golden light hovering in front of my eyes. Liam's gaze followed its manic dance, his eyes narrowing. My friends were taken, I said. Is there any chance they could be given back? Liam cocked his head. Do they have your friends' names? I thought back to the list of naughty and nice. Yes, they had their full names. Yes, I said in a hiss of breath. But, Liam, Dr. Casey's door flew open, her head poking out. I tried to ignore the boy flinching, the way his body seemed to lurch back. Would you like to come in? Her gaze snapped to me. Ruby, go home, please. I glanced at Liam, who looked panicked. Do you want to go in there? I asked him. Liam, Dr. Casey's tone hardened. Come on, what did we talk about? I told you I'm going to help you, remember? He nodded with a quiet yes before ducking his head and following her into the office. When the door clicked shut behind them, I thought back to the miniature fairy sitting on her bookshelf. I hovered outside the door for a few more minutes before swiftly leaving. I was on my way down the stairs to the reception area when two men shoved past me on their way up. Dr. Casey told me to go home, so I did. That night I woke up coughing up blood-stained flowers, vines stuck between my teeth and blossoming at the back of my throat. They weren't just haunting me mentally, they were playing with my body. There was something there, twisted and sandwiched, stuffed down my throat. Standing in front of a mirror with tweezers, I forced the two blades into the back of my mouth, pinching a single vine. When I pulled it from my lips, my throat ruptured and I choked up blood-tinged petals, leaves, and a growing tendril of earth entangled with a single strand of hair. Talia. Her long red hair stuck in my memory, and now it was clogging my faucet and shower drain. Talia's hair was the first real warning that they were coming, quickly followed by a shred of Levi's hoodie. And then, Jude's private school sweater. It was always pieces of them, nothing was ever whole. All I got were torn remnants and fragments of what had been real. It felt like a tease, like they were dangling my friends in front of me, cutting them apart, piece by piece, until nothing remained. I grew sicker, paler. Pulling scarlet streaked flowers from my lips and coughing up clumps of Talia's hair became a daily occurrence. I was barely conscious in class when the air around me suddenly stilled, a streak of shivers spiderwebbing down my bones. I could barely concentrate on the class itself, beforehand, white noise screaming in my ears. Now it was too silent, like all the sound had been sucked into a vacuum. Even the sounds of light typing, brief conversations, and pages flipping over. Everything had come to an eerie stop. Lifting my head, it wasn't just the sound. Movement had come to halt too. My professor stood at the front of the class. He was frozen, glued to the spot. But his eyes were still moving, frantically snapping left and right. Around me, my classmates were paralyzed to their seats. The ponytailed blonde next to me was mid-drinking her water. She was frozen while water sloshed down her throat. I could sense that she was choking, her cheeks turning red and then purple. But she couldn't move. The sound of water filling her gut, her stomach expanding, sent my own catapulting into my throat. It took me a disorienting moment to realize the wave that had enveloped my class had taken me to. Glued to my chair, I caught a flash of movement in the corner of my eye. There was a shadow moving down the aisle, a figure drowned in light so bright I couldn't see a face. When a sharp breath sounded next to me and the girl with the water dropped to the ground, I thought it was just her. But when it came again, another hiss of breath, and then another, students collapsing like dominoes, I knew exactly what was happening. It was pulling their breath from their lungs, teasing it, before tearing it from their lips. Bodies continued to drop around me. I could sense it, almost see it, wisps of dancing white being dragged from parted lips and disappearing into nothing. The lights flickered above me. I saw feet moving toward me, dancing down the steps. Closer. Under dull light, I glimpsed the torn remnants of a navy blue sweater clinging to a skeletal figure. The closer he came to me, I felt my own breath leave my lungs and squirm up my throat, forced through my lips. But it didn't leave me. Not yet. When he stopped in front of me, the lingering students around me toppling off of their chairs, he teased my breath, once and then twice, holding it between my frozen lips, letting me slowly suffocate. When my professor dropped, the lights brightened. The figure was no longer a shadow, a being that was once human. It still bared a human face, remnants of its old self. I wasn't sure what to call him. Beautiful, or maybe horrifying. I couldn't tear my gaze from his skin, flesh that had been battered and burned, branded and used as a canvas. There were intricate lines of black dancing his cheeks, just like Liam. But while Liam's had been old, faded, his were wet and fresh. I could still see the gleam, imagine the dripping paintbrush. There was so much wrong with him. Malnourished cheeks and skin so pale and brittle like the pages of a book. And yet I still found a sick sense of beauty, that grotesque and breathtaking beauty I remembered from their world. I had nightmares of him being twisted and contorted into one of them, but it was real. I had aged since our kidnapping. A whole year had gone by. Jude, however, was still frozen at 16 years old. Dark brown curls adorned with flowers and thorns, a crown of bone sitting on top of his head. I could see sharp pieces of bone sliced into his flesh, old and new rivers or red streaking down his face. His ears were pointier, lips carved into a feral smile that greeted me. No longer human and forever 16 years old, I still recognized him. Jude suited his crown. He suited his smile, two pointy teeth and eyes filled with mischief. Jude never had human parents, or at least ones that cared about him. Maybe that was why he had accepted his fate. Accepted his crown. After all, what 16-year-old human boy wouldn't want to be the heir to a fairy court? What he didn't suit was the bruises and burns, his body twisted into a plaything for the kingdom. Jude looked both human and fey, twin slits in his back, flaps of flesh resembling their sick idea of wings. I waited for him to take my breath. He did, tearing it to and from my lips like I was his own personal toy. When he was bored, Jude reached out his hand, finally, his eyes lighting up. I pretended not to see the scalding marks covering his arms. The rugged flesh on the backs of his hands. Ruby. From the look on his face and the whispered giggles in my ear, him laughing with the fireflies buzzing around me tugging on my hair, I didn't have a choice. He made that clear when he violently ripped breaths from my lungs, one by one. I accepted his hand when I could move again, gulping in oxygen. Jude didn't speak to me, but he did speak to the things still clinging to my hair, giggling in their tongue-twisting language. We left the room, his claw-like fingernails digging into my skin. He told me my classmates were not harmed. However, they were missing a significant chunk of their breath. Your sister, I managed to get out when he pulled me through the dark. I didn't even notice the passage of time. He could have had my breath for hours. Something rancid crept up my throat, and I spat out another explosion of red. More of Talia's hair stuck to my lips, glued to my chin. Did you find her? He surprised me with an inhuman grin that was not his, a glitter in his eyes that was both insanity and glee. Jude had their exact mannerisms, their twitching smiles and gleeful eyes. He was a bigger version of the fireflies trying to rip my hair from my scalp, laughing along with them. What sister? I was wrong. I thought Jude still had lingering humanity, but he was completely gone. I knew where he was taking me. Jude took me back to the nightmare world that I had been told multiple times wasn't real. The world filled with child-eating plants and the wooden cage filled with human children that I had escaped. I didn't feel as light back in their world. I felt like I could breathe again, my bare feet grazing the floor. I wasn't expecting the reception Jude got when he dragged me through streets threaded with plants and vines. Beings with painfully beautiful faces and horrifying twisted and contorted bodies dropped to their knees in front of him. The ground became harder to tread through, vines and flowers with minds of their own twisting around my ankles. Jude pulled me through them, laughing. Quickly, it turned to bones we were wading through. Humans. These things didn't just forcefully adopt people. They murdered them, proudly brandishing their horrified-looking faces. Stumbling after Jude, I scanned each kill. Levi and Talia. They couldn't be here, right? Looking back, I think part of me wished they were. The palace was not what I was expecting, a building made purely of human bone and entangled vines, a towering structure standing over the court. The guards standing in front of the doors bowed when Jude stepped through the door. While the exterior of the palace was exactly what I was expecting inside a Fae court, the interior surprised me. I could tell the Fae stole not just children, but human possessions. Glittering chandeliers hung from the ceiling, a staircase made purely of rose quartz. The ground was made up of patchwork human flooring, carpet, and marble with pieces of plastic, woven with thick greenery. In front of me loomed two thrones made up of entangled vine, the king and queen, adorned in the remnants of children, blood and bone decorating them. The queen wore an adult human skull, velvet-colored hair framing a heart-shaped face. Her clothes were patchwork, a dress made of white silk. She looked human at first glance, before her features were narrowing, like she was screwing with my perception. Jude lowered himself in front of them, yanking me with him. Kneeling in front of the king, I could still see the skeletal smile of the victim sitting on top of his head. I could see exactly where their head had been savagely severed from their torso. His clothes were made up of flesh that had been dried and stitched together. I had to bow my head, swallowing a shriek. He's wearing someone's skull. I managed to breathe, my chest aching. Jude shot me a glare, and there was a splinter of his human self. Be quiet. Oh, so he could speak. The queen stood and spoke in a language I could not understand. Looking at Jude, at the knot between his brow, he could hear what she was saying in perfect clarity. To me, however, it was a colorful tongue-twister language with too many S's. She's asking all of her children to present themselves to her, he murmured. What does that mean? That something big is about to happen, Jude hummed. Stand up. The queen only asks her children to present themselves to her only 3 times a day. Dawn, high eve, and late eve. What? He didn't reply, the sound of footsteps taking me off guard. They took their places next to the king and queen. I recognized Levi immediately, still dressed in the remnants of his Adventure Time sweater. His hair was overgrown, skin blistered and burned, resembling a stray. Unlike Jude's, his crown looked like it had been forced onto his head, splinters of bone glued to his skull, threaded vines and flowers adorning his hair. Levi's eyes were empty of that glitter I remembered when he called fake Santa a meth head. His smile was too wide. I could see blisters on his mouth where his lips had been sewn shut. I didn't want to see it, but I saw the exact transformation, slight points in ears hiding behind thick reddish curls, his face narrower, malnourished cheeks sticking out. Following those same inky black lines marking his face, I wondered if male Fae bore them. Just from looking at Levi Parrish, the boy had fought a battle he had lost, ending in him bearing a crown forced on his head and vacant eyes. Next to him, Talia. She was perhaps the most transformed from the three. Her naked back had been twisted into something inhuman. I could see where her spine used to be. Now something was growing from her flesh, something writhing up and down her skin, trying to burst out. Talia's hair was entangled in flowers and vines, a crown of thorns sitting on top of her head, instead of glued on like the boys. Half of her pretty face had been scorched, and then clawed away, ugly flaps of flesh, where her cheek was supposed to be. I could still see the claw marks on her neck, streaks of red. And yet, just like the boys, her grin was wide. The smile I knew was gone. Looking at all three of them, it hit me that my friends weren't heirs to the throne. They were toys. Playthings. Canvases for Fae children. Mother. Jude lifted his head, smiling wide. Father. Ruby. The Queen's voice was melodic. She rose gracefully. I am so glad you finally came to your senses. I lifted my head. I had no choice. Careful. Jude breathed. The last time I spoke back to them, I got the flesh melted off of my back. The Queen's lips curled. Human child, do speak louder. You are mumbling. Instead of responding, I bowed my head. I was speaking before I could stop myself. I'd like to make a request. And what is that? The Queen asked, tilting her head. Speak clearly, Ruby. An exchange. I forced out. I would like to request that I exchange myself to Leo Wednesday, Levi Parrish, and... I struggled to speak, the words tangled on my tongue. My gaze flicked to Jude's bruised knees, the thorns wrapped around this neck, which were constantly squeezing breath from his lungs. And Jude Whitlock. I spat out. For 4 human children of the same age. I stopped when Jude grabbed my arm, his eyes suddenly fearful, terrified. His lips were twisted, failing to form words. Asterisk, what are you doing? Asterisk, his expression screamed. I accept. I risked lifting my head, and she was smiling. Ruby, you are yet to become my full-blooded daughter, and you are already pledging yourself to rounding up human children. She spoke with a manic giggle. Now how could I reject an offer like that? We are already in a deal for 15 children this Christmas. 5 more would be a luxury. Oh, the things we could do with them. Her words sent slithers down my spine. No, I said. No, I didn't mean. My feet left the ground, and I was choking suddenly. The breath had been sucked from my lungs, and I felt them. Invisible fingers wrapped around my neck, squeezing. I was aware of my body hovering several feet off of the ground. The Queen sat back down. You did not mean what? I don't think you've been educated in our laws, she said smoothly. You do not speak my children's names. Do so again, and I will rip out your tongue. A fountain of red escaped my mouth, and I could feel something sharp winding its way around my neck. Like claws it stabbed into my flesh. I felt my head spin, my vision blur. I was going to die, I thought. I was going to fucking die at 18 years old, when my replica was out there living my life, and there I was choking on my own blood. When I dropped to the ground, the Queen cleared her throat. Speak clearly. You didn't mean what? I couldn't speak. The words were shredded in my throat. She didn't mean to badmouth you, Mother. Jude hissed out. The human child has a sharp tongue, and I asked just this once. Please spare her request, and her stupidity. What Ruby meant was a gift, he said. She will gift you 4 human children in exchange for your kindness and hospitality, as well as your forgiveness and a seat in the court. He wrenched me to my feet and dragged me in a bow. My chest was aching, blood dripping from my mouth and chin. But I bowed. I bowed 3 times, and each one was progressively more humiliating. When my face hit the ground for the 3rd time, the Queen cleared her throat. I accept. Her eyes lit up. Ruby, you must be so hungry. Please, eat. A table was brought in filled with fruit and berries, and further down the table, a human teenager skewered on a stick. His mouth was wide open, teeth pulled out, a bright red apple stuffed inside. That was when my mind started to slowly break apart. When the half-human, half-fae heirs began to rip flesh from bone, giggling manically, chewing through splattered scarlet dripping from the table. Jude handed me a goblet and told me to drink. It tasted like strawberry milk. And the wind chimes started in my head, growing louder until I was laughing myself, choking on a scream, trying to claw its way up my throat. When my crown was lowered onto my head, pricks of glass and bone cutting into my scalp, warm blood slipping down my temple, I felt dizzying happiness and unbridled fear, my lips splitting into a grin that wasn't mine. I was home. I don't know how long it had been since the feast. Since the crown on my head stopped hurting and blood started tasting like milkshakes. I was dancing, a whirlwind of color around me, dancing inside the wooden cage, dancing for my life. If my audience did not like my dancing, then I would be punished. I was twirling around and around, my thoughts cotton candy, until I stamped on something. Something sharp. Something that went straight through my bare foot. A nail. The pain was enough to wake me up, and when I was blinking rapidly, drinking in the pooling red I had been dancing in, a river of blood staining my legs, did I look up and see a familiar face peering through the wooden bars. His crown of thorns was still glued to his head, but I could see claw marks where he'd tried and failed to pull it off. Levi. He was awake. And pissed.